Hello, hello, hello! It's On The Ledge podcast, episode 124. I'm your host, Jane Perrone. You know what happened after I finished recording the Hoya tour from last week's episode 123? I realised once the episode had gone out that I forgot a Hoya. I knew I had 13 and I only talked about a dozen of them. So first things first, I need to tell you about that final Hoya. We'll also be meeting listener Jessie East Ward, answering a question about a yellowing Diefenbachia, and in the main chunk of the show, an interview with herbologist and chef Maya Thomas about, well, everything really. Question: what do Jack, Patty, Stephanie and Andy all have in common? Answer: well, they've all become patrons of On The Ledge podcast this week, so thank you very much to you. You give me life and you are helping to grow On The Ledge and take us to even greater heights. Find out how you can become a patron at janeperrone.com, and there's also details there of how to give a one-off donation via ko-fi.com and support the show in lots of other ways. Don't forget the On The Ledge shop, which offers you the chance to buy wonderful On The Ledge merchandise featuring our fantastic logo designed by Jacqueline Colley. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, mouse mats, it's all there. So do take a look at the shop. The link is in the top right-hand corner at my website, janeperrone.com. So before I forget, Hoyas, the one I forgot is the lovely Hoya australis Lisa. How could I forget this plant? Well, it was sitting on my kitchen windowsill where I normally don't keep Hoyas, so I think it just got a little bit hidden and forgotten when I was pulling those plants together for my tour. But it's a really nice plant. My one is a fairly small specimen that I picked up. I bought it from North One Garden Centre. Regular listeners will know I'm a bit of a fan of that particular shop. So this was bought there last year sometime. I can't quite remember when, as a smallish plant. I think it's actually 2 cuttings in a pot. And so far it's going up. The stems haven't got long enough to be the point where they start to droop down. But the foliage on this plant is really lovely. If you can imagine a leaf that starts out at its margins in the darkest possible green, and then in an irregular random pattern becomes ever lighter to move towards a pale green, lime green centre. It's glossy, it's leathery, it's a lovely Hoya leaf. And the nice thing about this plant also is that the new leaves come through this rather lovely carmine pink colour, and you do get flashes of carmine pink in the leaves as well, and in the stem, depending on how much light the plants are in. So this is a really, really nice Hoya. I can't wait for this to get bigger and start to trail. It's an easy one. I would say it's as easy as your regular carnosus and so on. I think it's also fairly easy to get hold of now, so it's one of those kind of entry Hoyas that will really get you into this particular genus of plants. So I apologise, Lisa, for forgetting you. I do love you very much. And if you've got a Lisa that's a bit bigger and more developed, I'd love to see a picture so I can see what my plant's going to turn into. So there we go. That's number 13. I don't think it's going to be long before my Hoya collection becomes even bigger. I just discovered a website in the Netherlands that sells loads of rooted and unrooted Hoya cuttings. There's also somebody in the UK who sells on eBay. So as soon as the weather warms up, I think I might be adding to my collection somewhat. I'm going a bit Hoya crazy right now, but I just can't get enough of these plants. And thanks to all of you who responded to last week's Hoya tour, it seems you can't get enough of Hoyas either. So do share your Hoya pictures with me. I'd love to see your collections and what plants you have. And, do get in touch for any cutting swaps because, I'm totally up for that if you happen to be in the UK. And now it's time to meet the listener.
My name is Jessie East Ward, and I live in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, in the United States. My first real houseplant was a Scheffalera that was given to me when I was about 14. This is when I really first started to take an interest in houseplants, and I've loved them ever since. For years, I've had more plants than I have a reasonable amount of space for, and since I've started listening to On the Ledge, that problem has only been compounded.
Question 1. There's a fire and all your plants are about to burn. Which one do you grab as you escape?
This is such a difficult question. So many of my plants have been with me for years and have their own stories. But if I had to choose, I think it would be my Euphorbia trigonia, or African milk tree. I would choose this one because it has grown the most in the time that I've had it. It was given to me by a friend about 7 years ago and was only 4 inches or 10 centimeters tall. Now it's about 40 inches or 1 meter tall.
Question 2. What is your favourite episode of On the Ledge?
My favorite episode is number 17 about Pilea peperomioides. This was the first episode that I ever listened to, and I love to know the history behind things, so hearing the story behind this plant was the perfect introduction to your podcast for me. A friend of mine owns a flower shop, and he hid baby pileas around the town and posted about it on social media for people to find. My kids and I went on a hunt, and that is how we got our pilea.
Question 3. Which Latin name do you say to impress people?
I'd have to say Sansevieria trifasciata, just because it's a very well-known plant, but people know it as the snake plant or mother-in-law's tongue, and so when they hear the technical name behind it, they get a little baffled.
Question 4. Crassulacean acid metabolism or guttation?
Guttation, because I have an orchid, Cattleyanthi Fire Dance Patricia, that I purchased this year at the Philadelphia Flower Show, and it did this all summer long.
Question 5. Would you rather spend £200 on a variegated monstera or £200 on 20 interesting cacti?
I'm a sucker for a good bargain, so I would definitely go for the interesting cacti and get more for my money.
Jessie, you are a woman after my own heart. If you'd like to be featured on Meet the Listener, then drop a line to ontheledgepodcast@gmail.com and it could be your dulcet tones on the show very soon. I first met Maya Thomas at the Garden Museum's Houseplant Festival last year when she was part of a panel discussion about plants. Maya is a cook, writer and herbologist. She's worked in herb and kitchen gardens across the UK, including the Chelsea Physic Garden, and she runs herbal workshops around the country. You can find her online at themodernherbal.com. And after hearing her speak, I knew I'd love to have a longer chat with Maya, so I headed down to meet her in her London home before Christmas, and we chatted. Boy, did we chat. The resulting interview is wide-ranging, to say the least. We cover everything from plant health to herbs to why weeds are wonderful. We stray quite a long way from houseplants, but I hope that all of you will enjoy listening in on a chat between two planty people. Do check out the show notes as you listen at janeperrone.com because there's lots of links in there to the things we talk about, from more information about the Don't Risk It campaign, which is a UK government campaign to encourage people not to bring plant material back from overseas, and a link to a piece I wrote about the community herb garden that I mentioned in this interview. I decided to run this whole interview, which is about an hour long, in one big chunk. So make yourself a cup of tea, settle down and have a listen. I mean, herbs are amazing and people are so... like this, I'm always amazed by how little people understand where things come from.
Yeah.
I mean, I always try, if I'm making something and it's got some particular thing in it, and sometimes I don't know, and I'm thinking, I don't know where this comes from.
Or how it's got.
Or how is... And then I always find it fascinating to look that stuff up. Like, what was it? Mace? I was looking up mace and I was like, wow, that's blown my mind. I can't believe what mace is. And I didn't actually get to the point of looking up where they grow mace or how it's produced.
Indonesia.
Is it Indonesia?
Yeah,
okay.
Well, a lot because it's the outer of the nutmeg. So if you think back to the spice trade and when, basically, I was trying to say this theory to my dad the other day. I was like, our whole economic system is basically based on the trade of plants. That's what it is. That's what all trade has been about. It's, you know, back in the medieval times, like 4 cardamom was the same cost as like a labourer's yearly salary.
And it stretches across the world, doesn't it? I mean, cotton in America, slavery. I mean, you get into...
Interestingly enough, the Chelsea Physic Garden, if you go there, they've got the original seeds that became like the most grown cotton in places like Virginia and things like that, was sent by Chelsea Physic Garden, the head gardener there, out to America, and it was So it's our whole history. Plants are our whole history, and I think that it's in the same way that we have become like so focused on how the provenance of our food, where it's coming from, how has it got to here, and we're all being slightly more ethical, and we want our farmers markets, and we want to be, interacting with the producers, and how was it grown, no pesticides, I think in the same way we need to be that curious about our houseplants and things that we're bringing into our home. And it's not possible to grow everything locally, and we can't go back in time, and particularly in the UK, because we're a country that has been formulated on the fact that we had an empire and that we traded in all these places in a quite unhealthy way for a long time.
Indeed, yes.
But I think that having all of that as part of our history, it's great that you can come to the UK and eat all sorts of foods and have all sorts of people living here. That's amazing. It's just being, we're all culpable. We're all responsible. And I think just as individuals, we have to, if we can, start to ask those questions a bit. And nothing's going to be perfect. We're not all going to stop flying overnight. We're not all going to stop using plastic overnight. But if we can start to ask some of the right questions, and that's where I think DEFRA's campaign for Plant Healthy comes in. So talking to Nicola Spence, who is Chief...
She's got a long title. What's
It's so long. It's like Chief Plant Health Officer and Department Director of Plants and Bee Health and Varieties and Seeds.
Oh my gosh, okay, so she's got a lot on her plate.
She has got a lot on her plate. And I think her Twitter handle is something like Plant Chief.
Yeah, that's
like
good.
Which is great. Yeah. I love that we have a Chief of Plants in the UK. I think
we
that's
need
a great
Chief of Plants. We do. We need that person. We need that person.
And, she and DEFRA have recognised that because we've got all these, we've got open borders, so to speak, that it's very important that we're starting to protect a lot of, some of the native species like oaks and things like that from pests and diseases. And as climate change, obviously, as our climate warms up, we're being confronted with new pests and diseases all the time. And it's kind of, if you think about it, it's a logistical nightmare. And it's not just the plants that are hosting some of these pests. It's also things like crates, the wooden crates that come in, they can hold particular pests that come in the wood. She said something brilliant, and you might have to talk to her about this to get it specifically, but the turf on our football stadiums, they're heated from underneath. So you can't and obviously they have to change the turf fairly regularly. You can't dispose of that turf just any which way, because of the way that it's heated. It can actually create a breeding ground that's perfect for particular bacteria in the soil. So it has to be disposed of in a very specific way.
Okay.
So things like that we wouldn't even think about, and where's this turf coming from, and how can we guarantee? I mean, it is a nightmare.
And I think that what has interested me is that this, as you say, the situation is complex. There's a lot going on here, and yet I often see quite a blasé attitude amongst houseplant people to the idea that maybe we should be a little bit careful about where we're getting stuff from. I mean, I quite often see on Facebook groups someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to the Canary Islands on holiday. I'm going to bring back all these things," and then people going, "Maybe that's not a very good idea," and then other people going, "Stop being so negative." Like, well, we're not being negative just for the sake of being negative, but actually because this is a serious issue that, and I think there's a lack of this sort of blasé attitude, possibly based I'm sure, on just a lack of information by people.
Yeah, I think and that is something that they've done. I think they had a Don't Risk It campaign that was, maybe some people saw it in airport, it was targeted particularly at people like that, people going away and thinking, oh, I'd love to grow this at home, and not thinking of the consequences of that. And there isn't at the moment any legal procedure to stop people coming in with things like that, but there will be, and I think they're going to introduce that. One of the things that I sort of believe in vehemently is supporting our botanic gardens in this country. And I think, the danger of having something that has essentially become a trend which is great, because any way people can get into plants, I think it's brilliant. And if they find benefit from that, great. But the thing with trends is that there's a section of people that will then I want something that's slightly different. I want something that's slightly more exotic. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk in trying to get that. And it's not just individuals taking risks. It could be, shops and things like that. So trying to get something new in that they can then get their sales up. So then they end up taking risks because those plants they're getting in, we don't know how they're being harvested. We don't know where they're coming from. Is there a legitimate, nurseries that are breeding these plants, or are they just being taken from the wild? We don't know any of that. And I think, the reason that we have not the reason we have botanic gardens, but one of the benefits of having botanic gardens is that you can go into a space where they have plants from all over the world, where they're doing research into those plants, the properties that they might contain for medicines, or how they've helped a textile trade or something like that, and plant collectors from the 18th and 19th century bringing those back, where you can go, of course you have to pay money to go in, but that money generally goes to research and upkeep, and you can learn about those plants in a very specific curated atmosphere for that. And I think that particularly things like places like Chelsea Physic Garden, that they rely on people coming and seeing the plants there, and the glass houses there, and all the ferns and different. You've got plants from all over the world there in a 4-acre space in a secret garden in London, and I feel like not enough people know about the work that they do there. And so it's that thing of, you don't want to be the downer on anyone's enthusiasm for you found green fingers. But again, and I know you've talked a lot about propagation and people getting together and social networking being online being a great form for that. Come and propagate, we can share things like that. But I do think that again, there is that risk of just occasionally some people being like, yeah, I'm going to go,
It's a bit of a gold rush, isn't it? I think that's the thing. It's this sort of feeling of, and I with aroids particularly, it just seems to be this kind of fever. And I look at the plants that somebody's going absolutely crazy over and, importing from Thailand and, going to the effort of getting a phytosanitary certificate, which costs extra money. So, props to them for doing that. Yeah. But I look at the plant and go, I know that it's really rare, but I think you could probably buy something just as beautiful and just as interesting quite cheaply. It wouldn't be that species, but, it's that thing of, it's rare, therefore I must have it, rather than kind of saying, well, this is a beautiful plant that I can get easily and I'm going to grow. I mean, maybe I'm being really unfair to the aroid crowd, but I just sort of worry that this desire for rarity sends people off on a bit of a hunt that is not necessarily very productive for horticulture as a whole, in terms of ending up shipping stuff way across the world and paying a lot of money for something which oftentimes, again, with any gold rush, there's bad practice happening. So people buying cuttings that don't have a node, that aren't actually going to grow, and that are so white, got so much white variegation that they're going to suffer and die because they're just not viable. So it's not benefiting anyone really in the long term. It's quite terrifying in a way.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think obviously I work with food. I'm a private chef as well as doing my herbology, which I try to sort of fuse the two together. And I think if you look at how food has sort of evolved, particularly late 20th century and early this 21st century, there was this trend towards suddenly cheaper cuts of meat instead of, New Zealand grown lamb and things like that, and locally reared things. And I think it's a lot of that was to do with, the term heritage and learning about the history of that. And I think what could be interesting is making the history available of more plants that are, maybe not strictly native. Maybe they've been here, they were brought here a couple of hundred years ago, but also some of our native plants, like we were talking about ivy earlier. And there's a really sort of interesting historical evidence around ivy and how we used it, particularly in like the sort of Iron Age and things like that. Even before there was I think it was an Iron Age site out, or Bronze Age site out in I think it's somewhere in Hampshire, and in the 80s they did a study of the pollen that they found in this old site, and I think overwhelmingly like 87% of the pollen that they found was ivy pollen. And they don't quite know why. They don't know whether they were sort of bringing it inside in the winter to feed to cattle, or which they don't normally eat. So, obviously ivy berries particularly can be poisonous. Ivy is used as a medicine. It's used as a cough medicine, but I wouldn't recommend anyone go and pick ivy because it would make you sick. But if you go to a good health food store, they usually have a sort of ivy cough syrup. But the evidence of that is, and we've had this tradition of, even the Victorians used to bring the ivy inside and decorate at Christmas. It's this evergreen thing that's always going. And it's also known as dimorphic. So you have the sort of 5-pronged smaller leaves, and then as it gets bigger, as it reaches the sunlight more, because it's a forest creeper.
I love ivy. I think ivy is amazing. I love the fact that you get this amazing. I know with aroids you're always talking about juvenile foliage and the older foliage, but like ivy does exactly the same thing, doesn't
exactly.
it? And people don't really realise that. Ivy is incredible, but I have to say I'm impressed that you've got ivy growing and looking well there, because I've tried to grow ivy indoors and it doesn't like it. That might just be me, but
I have to say
it's a lovely thing to bring indoors, though.
It is,
and it's tempting because it's there and it's all around us. So why not have some indoors? If you can grow it.
And a friend of mine, much older friend of mine, she's in her 70s, but she decorates her house in every Christmas with loads of ivy. She just goes outside and brings it in, and there's never not an abundance of ivy, and yet we spend money going to trying. We go to our florist and we buy all this, and the poinsettias and things like that, which is just a nightmare.
Oh, let's just horrible. I'd love to go to Mexico one day and see poinsettias growing in Mexico.
Oh my god, that would be amazing.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Huge.
Yeah, they're tree-like. Yeah, I would love to go and see that, but I just don't want one in my house. That's just my thing. I've
worked in a garden centre at Christmas, and they come in, and we normally had to throw about a fifth to a quarter away of every shipment.
Yeah.
Because they just weren't sellable. So I'd try to take them home. Save them
but
from
even if you're good at houseplants, I think poinsettias are quite hard. It just seems like a real waste of...
And they get thrown out. I don't know anyone who's like, oh yeah, I get my poinsettia.
I've seen a few... I've seen, on social media, I've seen a few people who've managed to get them through to the following year, but they're not red the following year. And you have to do this whole regime of light timing to get them to go red again. I don't that's a plant I don't really understand why people would want that, but again, I think there's a great deal of conservatism in our relationship with plants. People they've got things that they are comfortable with, and they just get, that's what we do. We get that plant, we have that, we have that herb. Going on to herbs, there's so many edible leaves and interesting herbs that you can grow and eat, but it's quite limited really what people
will do with it.
To work with.
It's interesting, and I think that's one of the things I try to do through my work is, reintroduce herbs to people, because people don't want, they're like, oh great, you know about herbs, so we'll hear about some exotic adaptogen like ashwagandha or something like that, and I'm like, we're going to start with rosemary, sage and thyme, and everyone's like, well, we know those, why? And actually, because people don't understand the antioxidant properties, the anti-inflammatory properties, how they're all antivirals. They're brilliant to use through the winter.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you this. Just little personal plea here. I have been, I must have read something about sage being really good for, so every day in winter, I drink at least 1, if not 2 cups of just sage leaves in boiling water.
Amazing.
Is that, it seems to be amazing. Like it seems to, every time I get a cold, which is frequently, but as soon as I have to start going on that sage tea, if I haven't already been drinking it, it does seem to kill off the cold really quickly.
Yeah, it will.
It's amazing.
That's amazing. Why did you start drinking it? Was there?
I read something. I mean, I've gone through. I must have in some kind of work related thing, doing something on herbs and just reading. I got a lot of books on herbs, so I must have just read something up about sage and just thought, why am I not using sage for my colds? Yeah. And my husband's like, oh, but it tastes disgusting. And I'm like, anything that you have that you start having, like a child having a new food that you haven't had before, is going to taste weird. Like if you had tea for the first time, it would taste weird. Normal, breakfast tea. You get used to the taste of sage. It's fine.
Yeah, and it's actually quite. I don't know if you, but I find it very delicious. But then
I've got used to it now. I'm totally used to it, and it just comes out, just gets picked out of the garden and used. And
do you just put it in a cup with hot
literally? Well, sometimes it's fresh, sometimes it's dried. We'll dry a load.
Do you always?
And I just cover it with boiling hot, or not quite boiling, hot water. And leave it. And sometimes I'll wait till it's cold, or sometimes I'll just drink it when it's warm.
And do you, once you've put the hot water, do you put a cover on the cup?
No, should I do that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Because the strength of any aromatic herb is in the volatile oils, which obviously escape.
Oh,
so something like sage it's very potent anyway. So like you've been noticing the benefits.
Yeah.
But if you can just, even if it's like a little saucer that you put on the top, the volatile oils they'll escape in the steam, but they sort of bounce up and then back in. So it's and
I always feel kind of very thrifty and very kind of pleased with myself when I do this, because I go in the supermarket and I look at the prices of these herbal tea bags and I'm thinking, bloody hell, I wouldn't pay £4 for that. And I think I don't need to pay. There's no reason why I would ever buy any of these, because I mean, and I'm not saying I haven't got an amazing herb garden at all. Fortunately I help run a community herb garden, so anything I don't have is usually in there. But again, it's like you don't need a lot of different things, but actually it's an amazing resource. Why would I spend money on those bags?
Absolutely. And people don't realise. I was with someone the other day and they said, I've just pulled out my sage plant and chucked it because it was too big, it was too prolific, and I never use it. And I was like, I had a minus stroke at the table. I was like, oh God, why? Can we go and find it? Is it okay? Is it? He was like, no, it was a few weeks ago. I was like, just devastated. And that's the thing, because people think sage, well, I use it with a bit of pork sometimes, and it's great. It's great for digesting fats. It's wonderful. But again, there's this whole other scope for it. And so what I try to do with the cooking and that is to try and bring the two together, and looking at historical cookery books, which are actually based on the very first herbals that were ever written. You look at the very first cookery books, they all tell you to go and look at the herbals written by people like Dioscorides and things like that. Right. So there was sort of, it wasn't such a break at everything. Food is medicine, medicine is food. It was literally that's such a major message, isn't it? I mean, we could go on about that for a whole day, couldn't we? I think it's also, there's this crossover, I think, between indoors and outdoors, and I know lots of listeners are trying to grow things like lavender and rosemary indoors, and I'm always kind of negative about that, and like, it's not going to work, it's going to die. But I don't know what your take is on that, whether it's kind of like, well, you can bring those things in for a bit and enjoy them, but ultimately they are happier outside. They are. And I am kind of with you on that. And I think, even if you've got a small window ledge that you can sit them on outside, they're not, they are hardy to our climate, and they do better outside. And I think when you grow herbs, if you can, even if it's a sort of, they're supposed to be grown quite big. They're shrubs, really, a lot of them. When we're talking about our sort of hardy, perennial, woody type herbs.
Yeah.
And if you think about how much you're using herbs, well, I use a lot of herbs, so growing them in tiny little pots inside is not going to work for me. I'm very lucky because I've got a tiny bit of flat roof outside, so I can put things on pots there, although it's an absolute mess at the moment. But
it's the time of year. It's the time of year when everything just looks horrendous. But
if you've got, it's one of those things. And Anna Greenland, who was on the panel at the Plant House Festival, we talked about, because she's an organic food grower. She's setting up a market garden in Suffolk, and we've talked quite a lot about herbs.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to cough for a minute. I'll have some more water, please. Yes, I've had another cold, which has been
Is it quite chesty?
No, well, it hasn't been up to now. I don't know why it suddenly just made me tickly. But again, I have a cold that lasts about a day, and then I say the sage kicks in, but it has seemed to be particularly bad this winter. I don't know if it's because it's been so wet, but normally I don't get that many colds. But it's probably actually because I'm more tired this winter than I have been in previous winters.
Okay,
recently.
Yeah. So your immune system's having to fight a little bit harder.
I think that's what it is. But anyway, enough about me moaning. Sorry, interrupting you with my tickly cough. Where are we talking? Oh, Anna Greenland.
Yeah, Anna Greenland. So we've talked quite a bit about, can we grow herbs inside? And, there's a lot to be said for, micro herbs and things like that. But even then, I went to work for Anna when she was at Soho Farmhouse, and that's actually how we got to know each other, because I've sort of felt like, well, if I want to be in the kitchen, I need to know how to grow everything.
Yes.
Which I think I have a plan for the future, which is that in the future all chefs will be trained partly in the kitchen and partly in the garden, because I think it will stop a lot of wastage, actually, if people understand the amount of...
There's this false wall, isn't there, between food and gardening, in journalism, very much so, which I always really kicked against in The Guardian, but when I was working at The Guardian, but again, it's just really, really prevalent. And you think... But why can't, if you actually, as a chef, if you understand how to grow stuff, then it massively opens up your horizons.
In terms of literally from flavours to how you cook with that produce, because something that's grown properly is going to taste completely different from just having it from any sort of supplier. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of, everything is seasonal now. Well, for those sort of the chefs that have really been championing that for a long time, and that has filtered through and down. But for me, it's just a kind of, it's a no-brainer also, because when you work in the garden, you work in a kitchen, the skills are quite similar.
Yes.
You're doing very similar things. A lot of it can be quite repetitive, in terms of you might be chopping or you might be planting seeds, or, a production kitchen garden as well it's hard work. It's really hard work.
Yes.
And if there's an understanding of how much it's taken to grow that, you're not going to be just throwing anything away.
How true.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I worked for a few days. I was very lucky to get some experience at the River Cafe, and how that was set up by Rose and Ruth was kind of phenomenal anyway, just from so many different points of view. They've never had less than 50% women in the kitchen, and I think my first day there, I think it was like 80%. And I got told off because I was snapping asparagus, and he was like, I know there's a natural break, but you can actually break it here. Anyone who's snapped asparagus, you need to snap the ends off. Nothing goes to waste, absolutely nothing. And it's the same. I trained at Ballymaloe in Ireland, and it's on a 100-acre organic farm, and in the kitchens you have these hen buckets everywhere because they've got loads of hens.
Right.
These are the best fed hens
they're getting
in the world.
Right.
So they're providing us with beautiful, delicious eggs to cook with every day, and we're giving them any bit of food. But even the peelings go into making, jams and chutneys and other things. So literally nothing goes to waste. And woe betide you if you get caught trying to throw anything out. Because
I feel like this whole, I think it's true of houseplants, it's true of gardening, it's true of cooking, that there's this whole kind of amazing universe of knowledge that our ancestors had. I'm not talking about way back, even just our grandparents, that somehow that is kind of being some people are carrying that on, but there's this whole sort of fount of information. In the last 50 years, we've kind of lost, or lots of people have lost. And I kind of, sometimes when I'm talking to people, I kind of feel a freak that I know how to do, and it's not like I'm trying to say, hey, I know how to pickle things or something, but I just feel like I wish that everyone knew, and I feel like a bit of an idiot kind of evangelist going, you need to learn how to pickle, or you need to learn how to propagate houseplants, because it just feels like, I don't know, come the apocalypse, this skill's going to, or not come the apocalypse, come like life.
Come
you
Brexit.
Need to know what, you need to know how to do this stuff. And that's why, again, my husband laughs at me because I'm kind of on this kind of, I'm always like feeling like I need to improve myself and get more skills. But I think that's like because I think they're going to come in useful at some point. And
absolutely. I mean, creativity is born out of necessity, and we have only had the period of, I say it in inverted commas, luxury of this throwaway culture of not having to store things, of not having to. Our grandparents' generation didn't have that luxury. Think of what they were doing. And actually, incidentally, I'm sure you know this, but the Second World War diet in the UK is one of the most studied diets around the world because it was so healthy despite the powdered eggs and the national loaf, because people were growing, people weren't eating that much meat, and they weren't having that much sugar. And what meat they were having with the cheaper cuts, and everything was being stretched a lot further. We had beautiful orchards in this country. Everyone was sort of doing their bit. And I think, and that all goes back to the soil. Yes. Actually, it kind of goes full circle. But I'm completely with you. I think, but it's the I don't think the knowledge has been lost. It's just been sort of pushed to the side in terms of this kind of, it's a false economy basically, because everything has been done for convenience's sake. So, but we live in a really time-poor society. So actually what we're compromising on, and I was working in a state school in Hackney actually as a cook, and it was me and another cook, and we were cooking for about 360 students every day. And it was part of a scheme of healthy eating, and the kids had a garden, so they'd grow rhubarb and things like that, and we'd make it into crumble, and so they could see that kind of, and then we were doing a lot with vegetables and trying to keep the cost down. And actually they got rid of that scheme really sadly because of cost cutting in education. And at the same time what was happening is they're more standardised testing. And so they're cutting down the dining times for eating as well. And then...
so it's easy, isn't it?
It's this myth that we can all work, have all the hours in the day to work, and then we can get our ready-made meals as we go home, and that's convenient. Yes. But it's you lose something, and this is, I think, probably it comes back to the houseplants and gardening and things like that. It's about nurturing something. It's about caring for something. It's about taking a bit of time to be considered and slow down. And I think that's part of the rise. And this is something I talked to Dr. Catherine Horwood, who was on the panel and has written a potted history, and that's we talked about this because when I was preparing for this talk at the Houseplant Festival, I was just sort of going through history and when were the times in history where houseplants were really, really popular. And the first time was obviously during the Victorian age, which was part of the expansion of the empire, and it was a status thing. But it was also with the background of the Industrial Revolution and people going to factories, leaving the land. We were mainly an agricultural society and coming into the cities. And then this explosion of this fascination with nature and going fern hunting on the Jurassic Coast. And,
ferns. Oh my gosh, the madness of the ferns.
And flower pressing and creating your own herbariums, And I think what we're in now is the midst of a digital revolution, and it's moving much, much faster than we are evolving to keep up with it. That's the sort of quite scary thing about it. And people are feeling overwhelmed and they're feeling burnt out and all the rest of it. And I just find it interesting that, again, then we see this drive towards everything back towards nature. And it's that, I think nature it's a comforter, and it's a wonderful thing that is the way. It's just making sure that it's not turned into a commodity at the same time.
Yes, and I think that there is a joy to saying, take an ordinary plant, take a bit of ivy out of your garden, and or just a bog standard plant. Sorry, I'm just going to blow my nose. The cold continues. And taking that plant and just nurturing it, and you know, don't make your first house plant a rare variegated aroid, because like you probably don't have the skill set yet. You probably don't understand enough to look after that plant, and it's really nice that you've got the power and money to go out and buy that straight away. But actually, like, it sounds, because I say I've got so many plants, what am I talking about? But actually, you're going to set yourself up for disappointment, because you're going to get that plant and it's going to die, or you're going to get that expensive cutting, and because you are so desperate, you bought it from somebody who's not following best practice, it's going to die. And then what are you going to do? You've lost your money, and you could have started out with something a bit more,
and also your confidence in the fact that you might, you know, like, oh well, you know. And I remember sort of early 2001, 2002, going off to university, and like, oh yeah, I want a houseplant, and you know, the only place to get it really was like IKEA.
Yes,
and you get, if you know, and they just die within minutes. And then I just thought, oh, I'm just rubbish. I'm just really rubbish at growing things, and I'm never going to try again. So when I started again, the only thing I felt safe with was ivy. I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to kill that. And then I took it to Scotland, and it just died within minutes. It was a soft southern ivy. It wasn't. Yeah,
prepared. You need the tough Scottish ivy. Yeah. And I think that journey of discovery is, you know, perhaps people go on it by buying the rare aroid first, but you know, that is, I mean, and that's what our, you know, forefathers would have gone through, that journey of failure and getting things wrong on the way to learning how things work. And there's just less of a risk. Like, nothing's going to happen if we kill our houseplants, but you know, if your crop failed, then you know, you're in dire stakes. So I think that's part of the journey, but also, you know, we've got access to this huge, massive information. I guess what annoys me though is that there's so much poor information out there. You know, if you Google houseplants, you just come up with all these ridiculous articles that don't really tell you anything, or there's numerous articles saying exactly the same wrong thing. Yeah. So that's kind of depressing, but
I do think when, like, going back to the plant healthy scheme that DEFRA are doing, and it's going to be like a logo, they're going to introduce it at Chelsea, I think.
Right.
So I think that's where they're going to unveil it. And it would be something to ask DEFRA and Nicola, but I do think that whether that comes with a standard of the people that are going to have that, whether it's in their shops or with particular nurseries or whatever, whether that, you know, is also a sign that actually that these are people that know about plants and will be able to tell you the best way. And the garden centre I worked in, actually, even though it was a commercial garden centre, and you know, there were certain things like in terms of wastage plastic that comes in and all of that stuff. These were people that actually, they did know about plants as well. So, and I think it is about supporting your local garden centres. If they're a good garden centre and they've been there for a long time, there's a reason for that. Like, instead of looking something up online, we used to have people come in and be like, you know, with their phones, oh, I'm growing this at home. And one guy who'd grown an avocado from an avocado seed, and it was like 2.5 meters tall. It was getting too big for he came, you know, he's like, what should I do with this? And we were like, well, I mean, I've never seen one that big. So, and then another lady who came in with pictures from her allotment, and I think she'd grown up in the Ukraine, but had been over here for sort of 60 odd years. And she was like, I found this, I can bring some in to show you, but I think I can eat it, but I'm not sure. And it was actually an edible weed, but just one that we don't necessarily eat here, where they eat more in Eastern European countries. And that was great that people felt that they could come in and have that relationship as well. And I think, you know, because online is just so much easier, and we just think it's so simple. But part of what you do with your podcast is that you're communicating with people, you're creating this network.
Nothing better than an actual person asking an actual person. That is very, very true. And you know, you always get an answer, or you tend to get an answer that way that is personalised to you and your what you're actually asking, as opposed to searching for something online and you get the kind of bog standard answer. So yeah, that is a great thing, and it's a great resource to be able to go to those places and ask for advice. The most depressing thing is when you go into a garden centre and ask for help and they know nothing, and then that's really depressing.
You could have just as easily walked into Starbucks and asked them, and they would have.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So when I do find a really like knowledgeable plants person, I'm like, okay, you're going to be a while now. Be talking to me and helping me out. So yes, but no, it's and what I really hope happens, in this whole Brexit scenario we're in right now, what I really hope happens as a good consequence of whatever's going to go down, is that there is some opening up of British, like there's new blood coming into the nursery industry and growing houseplants in this country. Wouldn't that be amazing if we increase the number of production nurseries producing this stuff?
Absolutely. And I feel like that across the board, in terms of I've got this like dream where I'm like, our market towns are going to come back to being market towns. And up in East Lothian, where I lived in Scotland, it's a very rich agricultural area. Traditionally, it's actually where the combine harvester came from, and the soil is like it's almost a purple colour. It's it's beautiful because you've got 3 volcanic plugs up there, so it's mineral rich, although commercial farming has done its best. But it's also filled with, because it was rich agriculturally, it was, you have these old estates with walled gardens basically. I started to see some really phenomenal stuff when I was up there. So there was Pyrus Botanicals. If anyone wants to check them out, please do. They're amazing.
Pyrus Botanicals.
Yeah,
okay.
So they are 2 former art students who met whilst working in a florist in Edinburgh, and they were kind of, shocked by the amount of flowers that were coming in, lots of tulips coming in from Holland or the Netherlands, I should say, and all these other places. And they thought, well, what about our native flowers and species? Anyway, they now rent out, they're very successful, they rent out a walled garden, one of these old walled gardens. They have their office there, and they just grow all these like native flowers, but also some other flowers, but it's all grown there. And I've had friends who when they got married would just go and pick up a couple of buckets of flowers and do their own decorations with it and things like that. So that is starting to happen in another walled garden. They're growing tea.
Okay.
And all done organically, and these walled gardens, the soil is amazing in them because it was just they've not been used for growing things for a long time, but when they were used, they used to use just horse manure and things like that, so they haven't been touched for a long time. So there are so many walled gardens in this country that are not being used or utilised. So that's another way of bringing, creating ideas around that and people being able to do that. I
think also the other thing that gets me kind of twitchy is this whole thing of, I hear from so many listeners who live in urban areas and they can't access rainwater for certain plants they're growing. They can't, I've just had a question from a listener who has all these leaves that come into her covered porch that she wants to do something with, and I'm like, well, you really need to like bag them up and use them for leaf mould, but you haven't got anywhere to store it. So there's just like, I wish that there was community composting, community resources with people in urban areas to be able to go, okay, can I get some rainwater from somewhere? I don't know how these things work. I don't know what it would look like, but I kind of think we need more outlets for people who are in urban areas who are catching on to this whole I want to be nurturing plants, allowing them to have outlets. And there are obviously lots of community schemes and volunteer schemes, but I think we need more of that.
I think we do. I think you're absolutely right. There are some great things going on in London, and having been away from the city for 6 years, I have to say the change is incredible. And the thirst for knowledge and people wanting to know about things and wanting to get involved in things. But there are also some brilliant schemes in each borough, and each borough does contain loads of green space, so that's wonderful. It's just making that more accessible, and I think also having borough councils supporting that in some way. It has to, it's great that people can set up these schemes, but then a lot depends on funding and
yes,
people being organised. And as we know, as soon as you get into an urban environment, people are
yes,
really busy, as we all are. And it's just, finding the right people and the right...
Tell me about it. I mean, as I said to you, I helped to, in a very minor way, helped to run this herb garden, which is on a roundabout, weirdly. It's a very nice roundabout, but it is
Amazing.
On a roundabout. And, we have volunteers, we do have maintenance sessions and stuff. And people often, when we're doing that, walk past and go, oh... And they assume that, like, the council funds it all. And we're like, no. So it belonged... The council gave it to us, basically, to maintain. And it's just done by volunteers. And lots of people love it. But lots of people still don't know about it. And you're trying to sort of say, yes, you can come and pick things and to educate people. But it's hard. It's an uphill struggle to get people to come and help and so on. But, that's life, isn't it? Anything you do with volunteering... Yeah.
I also think things have to start. What I've seen, where I've seen the difference mostly, is with kids.
Yes, yeah.
You get hold of them.
Yes, you get hold of the kids. It's so true
because they really want that. They really, really want to know, and they get so into it. I've got I used to have 10 nieces and nephews, and that I remember being a kid. You just want to be. As soon as you're outside, you're just kind of... There's a whole world to explore. Not everyone has access to outside space, and I appreciate that. And there are groups in London that are trying to sort of fix that. And I did some work recently with a company called Studio Cultivate, and they go into... state schools all across London. They also work at Chelsea Physic, doing these wonderful workshops for kids. So they work with kindergarten age all the way up to sort of, I think it's year 4 or 5. And they do teaching about nature, but through storytelling. And I think it's just such a wonderful thing. And they try and get the kids into some green space once a week and get their hands in soil and learning about, okay, this is a seed. What do we need for a seed to grow? And, and it's just, so that there is that. And the kids remember stuff. Kids as young as 4 are like, yeah, you need soil and you need water and
Yeah, no,
I know a lot of adults who don't know that.
It's amazing what they take in, isn't it? It really is. And once you've got that sort of ingrained in them from a young age, even if they forget it for a little bit in their teenage years and 20s... they will come back to it, and I think that is the crucial thing. And I love the whole, I love it when kids are like, oh yeah, that's a so and so plant. You're just like, I'm so pleased that that's amazing that you recognise that. Like it's like, I always think it's like putting on a pair of like plant glasses. If you've got your plant glasses on, you'll be walking down the road, you'll be going, oh wow, look at that, that. I don't know, gallant soldier or some weirdly named weed. Yeah. Or look at that, oh wow, that's an avocado tree that somebody's growing in London. That's amazing. But most people don't have plant glasses on. Yeah. I mean, wherever I'm going to somebody's house, I'm like checking out what they've got going on. And it might be nothing, but I'm always looking for people with interesting plants and looking in like barbers' shop windows where there's some kind of weird plant, because I've got my plant glasses on at all times.
Yes, I'm the same. I thought when I left London, I was like, I am leaving, I'm never seeing you again, goodbye city, I'm a country girl, I'm off. And life happened, and then I'm back here, and I thought, oh god, I don't know if I can, how's this going to be, I don't know what it's going to be like. And my whole experience of London is different because I've spent time working with plants, learning about plants. I can't walk anywhere now without, even if I walk down a street where there are some trees, just, they could be London planes or whatever, or I'm like, the roots of these trees are like underneath the concrete right now. It's a whole different way. And then just knowing about weeds, which is the wonderful thing about herbs, is that so many of our native herbs are denigrated.
We're going to go off on a weed podcast now, because I just love this stuff. I think there's just so many awesome weeds that I could just talk about all day,
and they've got the best names, like many of them, and they're the ones that kids play with, like Sticky Willy, actually that's a really potent medicinal herb that we so and being I live near the river, so I'm really lucky because there's a whole load of other stuff going on there as well. But if you're looking for the green stuff, and you're sort of keyed into that. It's not even that I'm looking for it, it's just a kind of second nature thing, you know.
It is. It's there, it's ingrained in you. And I think whether you start out with houseplants or whether you start out with outdoor gardening or however you start, I think then it just colours you and changes your attitude to everything. And I have had people who are kind of outdoor gardeners say to me, as a result of listening to the podcast, they suddenly sort of wake up and go, hang on, indoor plants, and then they're really coming around to the idea of having plants indoors, whereas they thought they couldn't grow them indoors. Well, of course you can. You just need to try and have a go. So I think that's a really exciting thing about anything to do with plants, is that once you've got your plant glasses on, you go. And I mean, houseplants, there's such an incredible stuff going on in your houseplants all the time, like just amazing stuff, which I love learning about. And I think, there's such an acceptance that knowledge is not a bad thing to have that knowledge about your plants. Like, you can go as geeky as you like.
Absolutely.
And people who listen to my podcast are still like, this is amazing. I mean, Botanical Latin, I thought that was going to be the least popular episode ever. Like, I've done a podcast on Botanical Latin. But no, people really enjoyed that episode and got a lot out of it. And it's still one of my most popular episodes. So it's, that's cool. I'm really pleased that that's the way it is.
And I think it goes to show that when people understand, it gives a depth of understanding to something that helps you to form a wider relationship with the plant. It's not just about how it looks. It is about a relationship. Like, I'm sure we all talk to our plants. I can say that in safe company, right?
Yeah, totally.
And some of my plants are he's, and some of them are she's, and some of them are they's. Yeah. But like, it's that thing, and that is what creates a difference. And I think it's pretty scary if you read the papers these days. It's pretty scary if you watch the news, and we feel like we're heading speedballing towards a climate crisis that no one who has actual power is doing anything about, no matter how much the rest of us cut down on plastics or do anything like that. But I think having that relationship, whether it's with one succulent or the ivy growing outside your front door or whatever it is, if you're able to see that and know a little bit about that, it actually, I think it shifts your consciousness. That's personally what I feel. I don't know whether that's an idealistic way of looking at it, but I think things start at home, and sometimes it can be so scary to think about what's going on the other side of the world and how climate is affecting in much greater ways than what we're seeing here in the UK, although obviously we're seeing changes here in the UK. And if we can start to just bed in, if we can start to open up those crevices in our mind to sort of forming a relationship, because that's what it's about. It's about getting back and having something that's tactile and seeing the benefits of that for the plants and for ourselves. Then maybe that will have an impact on something wider. I mean, that's how I choose to see it, and that's because I have to. Because
you've got to stay positive. Right? Yeah, you have to stay positive completely, and you have to hope that more and more people are going to their consciousness is going to change, because we've got to, as you say, we've got to stay positive. I think that's where the whole houseplants for mental health thing comes in, and that they do. If I go into somewhere where there's no plants, it just doesn't feel quite right to me. It always feels a little bit kind of like
sterile.
Sterile.
Not quite
fully
complete.
Formed. Yeah, but I think we're in the early stages of. I think in 20, 30 years' time, we might be in a very. I don't know. I'm getting all existential
but
now.
I always use this example. Like, do you remember how people used to view acupuncture and yoga? Like, it was very on the margins. It was very on the fringes, and healthy eating, and
yes.
And look how mainstream those things have become. And some people just went into it because it was the trendy thing to do. It was the new thing to do. And then actually once they started doing it, they realised, this really works for me. This feels great.
Yes.
And there is still a large section of that world that is geared towards image and whatever. However anybody gets into something, if the truth of it is there, if the benefits can be seen, they will be seen.
Yes. Yeah.
There's
a lot of things that used to be quite marginal. I mean, I remember I'm not vegetarian or vegan, but my husband's vegetarian. I remember 20 years ago going to stay in a vegan bed and breakfast in Wales, and they did an evening meal, which was this amazing vegan evening meal. And I remember literally there'll be other people staying there who'd be like in tears because it was the first time they'd eaten somebody else's food ever as a vegan, because like you just couldn't go out as a vegan 20 years ago, and it wasn't and they'd just be like, this is just so amazing, this food's so good and I haven't had to cook it. Whereas now the idea of that is ridiculous, isn't it? You're like, of course anyone who's vegan can go and go to the supermarket and get a whole range of wonderful stuff, as it should be. Change is possible and it's happening, so that's our positive
exactly. And I think it's just it's just being aware of the ways in which we're doing that, and I think that's because there's good ways to be into plants and all the rest of it, and with veganism, and which I totally think is amazing. I was cooking a lot of Greek food recently on a job, and I realised like most Greek food, there is some meat, but a lot of Greek food is actually vegan. And I was like, do people know about this? Because we're all thinking about like the newest vegan this and that and tofu and da, and how's that putting strains on the environment and stuff. And again, you don't want to be that person who's like with your hand up going, I'm just thinking about monoculture farming and the fires in Kuala Lumpur, like the air quality from, you don't want to be that person, but also you're kind of like, we can't afford to turn a blind eye to anything. And I think, like you said, it's easy for us in our kind of bubbles to think, things are getting better, but you just never know. I think you have to do what you're passionate about and hope that you can bring people along with you.
So just to finish, if somebody listening to this is into houseplants, but they're just thinking, I don't really know where to go with this whole sustainability thing and this whole plant health thing, what are the kind of the key things that the three things that people should be doing now to kind of get themselves on the right path in terms of sustainability? I
think listening to your podcast obviously is a very good start. Of course. And the two issues, the few episodes you've done on sustainability. I think next year when the Plant Healthy scheme rolls out, that will be something to that will be something visual and tactile that people can sort of key into. You can look at the Plant Health portal online. It hasn't got loads of specific things about houseplants at the moment, but what I would do more than ordering your plants online, I know there are some really reputable, brilliant people online selling houseplants, but I think if it's your first houseplant, go and find a good nursery. Go or talk to a friend who is growing houseplants and has done so quite successfully, and talk about just how did they get into it, and start simple, like you said. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful, stunning, incredible, I remember I got a calathea and then I killed it within.
Well, how many of those plants are people killing? I mean, the one they sell in IKEA, the orbifolia with the huge, massive leaves. The number of those I see on people's feeds, and I'm like, oh God, you've just bought that, haven't you? It's going to be dead within 6 months. It's a really hard plant. It makes me cry.
I know. I actually say I killed mine. My mum, who is just amazing, she did somehow manage to bring it back to life. Okay.
They are tougher than people think, actually. Like they can literally be cut down to the ground, and then if you have patience, I had one that was literally like one tiny leaf, and it's coming back quite nicely. But it's a tricky journey.
It is, and I would say also, don't be afraid. I think that's one of the things that when people come towards plants, they can feel a bit like, oh God, I don't want to, kill it. But obviously, most houseplants die from overwatering as opposed to underwatering. I think that's the most common thing. But I think in terms of sustainability, find a good nursery that you can form a relationship with where the people seem knowledgeable, where they can tell you the provenance of the plants. Definitely find good sources of reliable information online. And talk to friends that who grow themselves. I think also propagation might be one step too far if you're just starting, but it's a great way to get into it. And if you want, if you've got a friend who grows prolifically, or you can find someone online who might be willing to sort of give you a plant even.
There's some amazing swapping going on, actually. There's just some really, really wonderful houseplant groups where loads of swaps are happening, and that seems to me to be a great way to get a plant. And I think also the other thing I always think is, if you're going to buy a plant, don't buy the massive, huge, mature plant. Buy a young plant, because I think it's less disappointing if the tiny plant dies, but also I think you've got more chance of kind of moulding it to your way of living. Do you know what I mean? Like a big mature plant is already kind of set in its ways.
Yeah,
I know that. I'm also just a cheapskate, and I don't want to pay a lot of money for big plants. That's the other thing.
Something that costs £2 or £3 that you could like. Very simple. Yeah. But I think all of that, and also just basic plant hygiene, which you can educate yourself really easily on, which is just about, if you've got something it's going to lose its leaves at some point, just making sure that everything is clear and clean, and you know where your soils come from, and all of that. And if it does come in plastic, please don't throw the plastic tub away, and make sure that you can keep those, because you never know, it might start with one plant and then before you know it.
How true. This is very true. I was actually thinking of doing like a tweet a day of my houseplants, and then I thought, that's going to take me the whole of next year. But I might do it, actually. I might do that for 2020. I'm thinking like a houseplant a day, and see how long it takes me to get through all my houseplants. That sounds like fun.
This is going back to something you were saying earlier. This is a book my great-grandfather wrote.
Oh, wow.
He wrote a few books, and it was about starting small. And I used this, I opened this book actually when I was going through a really difficult personal time, and it made me feel so much better, but also just in terms of plants. So he says, everyone who writes gardening books is morally bound, I think, to help the beginner. Someone is always beginning. There is also, it's a rose book, so he does talk about roses, but there is also a debt to the roses. For some are so much more accommodating than others, and to start with the difficult ones is like taking the wrong turning on setting out for a long journey. How lightheartedly we go forward, the mind full of pleasurable anticipation, eager to discover fresh delights, keen to perceive new points of interest that every bend of the road brings into view. But when it is forced upon us, that the way we have taken leads us not to where our hopes are set, but that each step takes us further from the goal, in mental view, how different it all seems, how long and weary is the way back, how dull, how void of interest that path that seems so bright, so gay, so full of sunshine. And then he says, he said this wonderful thing, and I'm going to have to find it. I actually probably written it down somewhere. I'll find it.
What's the name? What's his name?
H.H. Thomas.
Oh, that's a lovely thing to have. And what a beautiful cover it's got on it.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
He was really prolific. So his father was actually born on Anglesey, and he went to work on the local estate when he was just a wee lad, and ended up becoming Queen Victoria's head veg gardener at Windsor. And then this was his son who went into banking and then decided that was rubbish. and then
career changer. That's.
I mean, it's always happening. Yeah. Okay, so this is what he said. His conclusion on how to begin well is for the novice rose grower, but this could be for any plant grower, is he'd suggest for the rose grower to start with both climbing and dwarf roses, the latter for delight, the former to captivate the promise of an abundant blossoming to come. So basically, when beginning with plants, find something delightful, that which brings you delight, a verb, which is to please someone greatly, or a noun meaning great pleasure, that will help you climb out of whatever ending you've had to endure and let it lead you into the light. And then to start small. The smallest beginnings can lead us to prolific growth and blossoming.
Oh, that's so lovely. That really sums up my own philosophy, because I see so many people who I sort of think, yeah, you're buying that plant because you think it's the cool thing, and actually just be driven by what makes your heart sing, what brings you joy, And that might be like the most unfashionable plant. But if it's bringing you joy and making you happy, then, I mean, that's why I love the sort of the Gesneriad family, which is very much out in the cold style-wise, the sort of the Streptocarpus and things. But I love them, so I'm going to keep on growing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that thing, if you go into a nursery, you might be drawn to something completely unexpectedly, as opposed to looking at images online and thinking, that looks kind of cool in this room that I've seen. Go in, see what you're drawn to, because it could be something unexpected.
It's very true. Well, Maya, thank you so much. We've ranged all over the place there, but that's cool. That's, as anyone who listens to my podcast knows, this is what happens when we get talking. But it's a delight talking to you today, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Maya for inviting me to her home and giving me delicious homemade hot chocolate to drink, which was amazing. Best hot chocolate ever. And now we've just got time for question of the week before this mega episode closes. And it comes from Laura, who's got a trouble with a dumb cane. Diefenbachia, there's a million pronunciations for that one, but there's the same thing. It's a dumb cane, a beautiful foliage plant that many people love, but it is worth being aware with this one that the leaves are a little bit toxic, so you don't want to be letting your pets or children grab hold of the leaves of this one. And if you are repotting it, it's worth putting some gloves on if you have particularly sensitive skin. Anyway, the problem is this. The plant has yellowing leaves. It's a common story at this time of year. This one was bought a couple of months ago, Laura tells me, and it started to drop leaves, which have turned yellow, gone pale, and then fallen off. She knows the plant's a bit pot-bound, and looking at the picture I can see, yes, Laura, you're absolutely right. There's a lovely little mesh of roots around the outside of the root ball, showing not a great deal of soil. This plant is definitely looking for new space to grow into. So she's been trying hard not to overwater, and not making sure that it's not sitting in water, but she's finding that these yellowing leaves are still happening. So what's going on? Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head, Laura. The plant is a little bit pot bound, and what moisture there is, the plant's finding it hard to absorb the moisture that's there, and so it's kind of shifting between being waterlogged and being too dry. And this is what happens when you get a pot bound plant. They just can't regulate the amount of moisture so well because there isn't enough spare soil in the pot. So you get this situation of kind of, I'm waterlogged, no, I'm too dry, no, I'm waterlogged, no, I'm too dry, because the water's just running through or pooling in the bottom. So what to do? Well, I would recommend that you should repot this plant. I would say it's probably safe to leave it for another month or so, Laura, till you get to sort of mid to late February. The plant's not going to die in the intervening period, and it might cause a bit of stress if you try to pot it now during the dormant period. But, you know, it depends. If it keeps going downhill, then go ahead and repot, because it's better to repot than to lose the plant completely. But it would be better to wait until it starts into active growth again. The rest of the plant's actually looking pretty healthy, so I don't think this is too much of a problem. I think it can cling on for a bit longer until you're ready to repot. When you do repot, the usual rules apply. Only pot it into a slightly larger pot and tease out those roots, because otherwise they're just going to end up going round in a circle and they're not actually going to grow into the new compost so well. But I think that's the problem with this plant. It's a really common problem at this time of year. Every plant that you have will be developing a few yellowing leaves. These foliage plants just do that at this time of year. There's less resources around, therefore they've got less need for the energy factories that are their leaves. So they're going to drop a few. It's an efficiency procedure, which the plants do. You can understand why. It's not something to go too panicky about unless all the leaves start doing that. So keep a close eye on your plants, and with this dumb cane I think it should be fine once it's into a new pot, Laura, and I really hope that helps. It's a lovely looking plant. I'll post a picture in the show notes. It's a plant that is relatively easy to look after. Oftentimes when you buy one, you'll find that it's been potted up and it will just be bursting out of that pot. So oftentimes when you first buy a plant, it's worth having a look at the root ball, seeing what's going on, whether it's potted into the right kind of mix. And if it is not potted into the right kind of mix and or it is already root bound, then repot straight away. There's no harm in doing that. The plant's going to be in shock anyway, moving to your house. So repotting is only going to help it if things aren't quite right down below from the beginning. So that is the dumb cane in summary. I haven't done an episode on that plant. Maybe that's one that I should look at. I've got such a long list of plants I need to cover. But thank you, Laura, for your question. I hope that helps. And if you've got a question for On the Ledge, you know what to do. Do what Laura did. Send me a lovely detailed message with lots of pictures as well is great to ontheledgepodcast@gmail.com. That wraps up the show for this week. I'll be back next Friday, but I hope that you have an absolutely fan-dabby-dozy week. Take care, plant fans. Bye! The music you heard in this week's episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops, I Snost, I Lost by Dr. Turtle, and Take Me Higher by Jazar. All the tracks are licensed under Creative Commons. See janeperrone.com for details.